I was invited here to sort of work with the archive. And once I arrived, I was aware of this radical decade and the sort of archive that Derek spoke about earlier. There's probably one long wall of boxes which encapsulates everything done within that decade.
I wish you did.
Well, okay. Well, you tried, but I think so. I made knowing that Derek was already on, that was already his line of inquiry. I decided to sort of understand the collection, the archive, and the exhibition collection, the gallery collection, as if the radical decade didn't happen, and make my own sort of inroads into what all that information encapsulated. So what I'm going to sort of breeze through here is sort of writings and ruminations coming out of my first sort of hand experience, sort of putting myself in Rochdale as a town, situating the collections and paraphernalia around Touchstones. And it might not be coherent, but it'll sort of give you an understanding of where I was coming from. I came to art late in life from a background in industry. So I can still remember the trauma of entering the hallowed hushed space of the gallery and not having the language or the knowledge to confidently enter these spaces. Instead, probably drowning in self-awareness, I probably mocked fun at the exhibits to mark my own feelings of being an interloper, a strategy perhaps for coping with the overwhelming sense of feeling unwelcome. To this day, although braver in the way I execute my visits, I still have a conflicted relationship with the museum as architectures that collect, form, commemorate, and disseminate knowledge. As institutions with a remit to be at the forefront of a local community's cultural well-being, it would seem in these times of doubt, instability, and a debate around the histories we receive or inherit, that museums and galleries around the country are having a crisis of confidence. Have these imposing civic architectures, these fortresses of knowledge and learning, finally entered a period of reflection, a crisis of self, burdened perhaps by the weight of their early establishment and patronage as great signifiers of British wealth and supposed cultural superiority? It is said that the victor takes the spoils and tells the stories. But what happens if you find yourself at the twilight of post-war prosperity, where the bulldog vigor of old now manifests as a spent force? What if as a country you've developed, unbeknown to yourselves, from the barroom braggart into something quite reflective, international in outlook, cultured, complex? Of course, if you don't take care to look in the mirror, or if you've looked in the mirror and you've not been able to reconcile yourself with what you have become, this transformation plays out unacknowledged because you failed to align yourself with your outer appearance. Your attire, your Victorian fustiness and respectability becomes your first and only impression. As I arrived in Rochdale, myself an interloper, I noted and observed. Rochdale. Let's see. Oh, fuck. Space bar, isn't it? There we go. Rochdale, one of the early centres of the Industrial Revolution. 52 languages spoken, yet there is no reference to the international, to the dynamic social and cultural enrichment in the town. It is seldom referenced or celebrated. The town is defined and anchored to the post-war, with its highlight or pinnacle being the war that was won. The war memorial by the celebrated architect Edward Lutyens has all the pomp and grandeur of a barracks town. The victory, the freedom won, seems to have a specific articulation. A town of diversity, a town of tolerance, to tolerate. If it's about PR, this town is the birthplace of the co-op, a town that dared at one time to be so radical, so forward-thinking, that it reimagined and redefined the idea of community making. Seems lost for ideas, seems lethargic to the richness of its inhabitants. The town hall. The town hall, which is being newly refurbished. The PR campaign for this new unveiling talks of our history in monolithic terms. Whose memories? All prominent images have that glaze of a pre-war nostalgia, conveying a certain allure of how it used to be. We are all in some way seduced by nostalgia, how it holds times. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall at one of these PR meetings. Who was the potential visitor they had in mind? Why do I come over with a sense of apathy when they say our history? Who do they mean? Obviously, in the selection of these images, there was a detailed discussion on the mood and tone to be conveyed. How do we give our potential visitor that warm feeling, that warm glow of how things used to be? Dispersed in amongst are the isolated children of migrants, shorn from a context. They are sprinkled in as if garnish or seasoning, a gesture that now posits them as the future, our future. But how can you reflect the future without the ceaseless echo of the past, the present? The Art Gallery, Touchstones. Thousands of students pass by the gallery, museum. This Victorian showpiece in all its solid grandeur appears ephemeral. It lacks weight, functioning only as a place marker to be walked around. It doesn't exist. Like the town, it is a structure not to be like the town hall, it is a structure not to be trifled with. Its facade speaks a language uncommon to the uninitiated. From outside, there is a dearth of transparency and openness. Like a dried out lemon, it has suffocated itself on its history, making the collection lack vitality, drawing and pulling on its vital remaining nutrients to stay alive. But we won the war. Now what? Post-industrial decline. Now what? Accessions, accessions, accessions. But yet some of these objects are dead. There is no story, good or bad, to illuminate them, to resuscitate, to give them life. 7. So within the museum, there is a wonderful set of collated objects around the Rochdale lass Gracie Fields. A resplendent dress that she wore for the 1978 Royal Variety performance conjures up for me all the magic of this rise from humble beginnings to the lofty heights of world stardom. But what if we imagine the same significance or focus was transmitted to a coveted concert ticket that was never used, that was then harbored by a teenage boy or girl in the bottom of a drawer or in a scrapbook, and saved so that one day they might show their grandchildren? I refer here to the 1977 cancelled Sex Pistols gig at the Royal Championers Hall, which was reported by the Rochdale Observer by the headline, "Sex Pistols are sent packing," Apparently, the local Methodists were none too pleased with the pistols appearing in their hall and pressured Rochdale Council into submission. Now, not every object that is brought in has to be as rarefied an example as that, but I think the potential of any object to cut across the diverse heritage of a town and reveal the what, where, whens, and hows are enormous for mapping out an unconventional local histories. For mapping out the unconventional local histories of Rochdale, especially when the person has the opportunity to recount the story themselves, to talk about their own investment in that object. Collecting, displaying, and presenting objects as human, this is our raison d'etre. We are all caught up in this social ritual that is common to us all. It was only later that I realized the significance of the position of a memorial, the war memorial, in relation to the town hall, civic relations. I took pleasure in the confidence of the students as they brokered their own relationship to the openness of the outside civic spaces. Outside in the gardens is the fettered architect Edward Lutyens' War Memorial. London has one, Manchester has one, Rochdale must have a Lutyens. I observe the cenotaph's grandeur. It takes on the life of a prop, a theatrical backdrop, a setting where the youths hang out, flirt, and hold court in its gardens. They express themselves in lavish gestures. They express a sense of ownership of their surroundings, of their town, of not being constricted, a world away from the other civic architectures that seek to enclose and impose by design a set of behaviors and virtues. I walked down to the newly developed part of town, Marks and Spencer's, the council offices, and the library. It's a beautiful, spacious, and transparent space that houses the library. It feels more than just books. It's communal, it's open. Just like a hospital when you are sick, it feels like a safe place. It's an institutional space that I have no hang-ups around. I walk past the police station, where across from me there is a demonstration of no more than 5 men. A jeep carries a large LED screen which shows what seems to be excerpts of a documentary that features reporters attempting to speak to mainly Asian men about alleged accusations of child abuse. The headline across the top of the screen reads, "Send them back, deport them," which is simultaneously read out over a loudspeaker, amplifying their calls. The collection. I see within the collection a gaping hole between the fault line of the pre- and post-war, the might of industry and its eventual capitulation. There seems to be a chasm, a before and after that fails to register the tectonic shifts in migration that would greatly change the cultural landscape of Rochdale and Britain as a whole. The wilderness years. I deep dive to no avail, but by chance I come across something that strikes me, documentation that gives me hope. The painter Harry Kingsley, who was born in Manchester, born in 1914, died in 1998, and studied at Manchester Art School. He served in the Second World War before becoming an art teacher in a Manchester secondary school. His work is in the collection of a variety of galleries in the Northwest, including Manchester Art Gallery. Like L.S. Lowry, Kingsley depicts and focuses on the industrial districts of the northwest of England, placing an emphasis on industrial architecture and the way it governs people's everyday lives. But unlike Lowry before him, there is less permanence in these structures, as if catching a moment of transition, a witness to times changing, a last portal into the past. The paintings depict buildings in resignation, heavy with the weight of history, weather-beaten, weary, sorry totems to the past. There is hope, though, an uncertain future. From above, this new future is hinted, as already in the distance some paintings, in the formality of perspective, with its skyline unblemished, in the mind, to me, gives shape to a high-rise future. But what Kingsley also managed to do, in all his drabness of colour and his matter-of-fact way, was to depict the inhabitants of these towns in the northwest and make visible the lives of migrants and their children, in the humdrum of the everyday, in the community as consumers, as workers, their participation in forms of entertainment, the fashions and the youth culture at the time. The high-rise future. Applications from all over the country, luxurious high-rise accommodation, professional living, modernism's ideals, spaces, machines for containment, machines for living, each individually containing the organic, idiosyncratic social cultural messiness of life. Reaching up for victory, heroic, a totem, testament of pride, sculptural rising from sublimation, rising of and beyond the slum, tall and proud, looking down on Rochdale, imposing, Rochdale, Rio, Reggio, or Rabat, modern and luxurious. Permanent memorials to upward growth, Swedish design, luxury with truth instilled in material, iconic landmarks, 7 sisters, 7 children, 7 fingers. They will drift from the north, flight from the town. We will see a departure of our people if there is not suitable housing provision. Mitchell Hay murals. Mitchell Hay murals, College Bank flats, George and Joan Stevenson ceramic murals in 6 blocks originally. Only one remains. Residents vote against keeping them and they are removed. Murals as a mode of beautifying, as a mode of taste making, forming taste, particular values, aspiring through abstraction, as fashion, as consensus, as marmite, as getting by, as an abstract form over time not recognized, as fixture and fitting, as period feature, as decorative touch and elegant addition. Removed by committee, removed by consensus. What were they thinking? They were ours, part and parcel, the fabric. They grew on us. Their beauty diminished in significance when you were lugging 6 bags of shopping from the Asda. We came to love them, and I saw, where do reside my beloved carbuncles? Philistines. My search amongst shops and newsagents for a Rochdale postcard to send ends in futility. What do we collect? Who do we collect for? How do we create a more dynamic and responsive way of engaging the multiple interconnected stakeholders that represent communities? Is the museum the right place for this? Is the museum the right place for this if there is forever a hierarchy of choice? Is the museum the right place for this if there is forever a hierarchy of expertise? Is collecting the right action? Empire and its departments of classification have an economic rigor that prefers resolved outcomes for stories that become frozen in time, fixed. Classification allows stories to be told that reinforce particular narratives. Classification has a disdain for the unresolved, for the untidy and disparate, for the loose threads that allow stories to unravel and fray. Universities and museums as, as epistemological tools are violent places that brutally classify and makes things visible by suppressing other forms of knowledge production. They need dismantling, a new model. The civic has to be open, transparent. We have to get away from the fortress model, glass, light, architectural motifs that signify. Maybe it's just signification, a new language, or maybe these institutions do more damage with the perception and communication of transparency. As well as these starting points for discussion, I want to suggest new ways for interrogating existing collections that are foregrounded by an elasticity of interpretation. Tools such as the remix, sampling, biting, encoding, deviance, humor, myth-making, mocking even, can be seen as strategies to reimagining the collection. The seemingly chaotic arrangement of Touchstone's collection will hopefully help to illuminate questions of hierarchy, taste, and value, but also give an understanding of its institution's own plight and difficulty with considering these questions, revealing a complex history along civic and national lines that is underwritten by a fluid engagement that allows shared stories to forge new meaning in the present contemporary moment. Those histories interweave complexity, intersectionality, the layering of complex histories. I'm interested by the act of representation and how that communication goes beyond a physical likeness. Through portraiture, statues, and busts, the sitter gains the means to attribute to themselves qualities of virtue, beauty, wealth, power, learning, and esteem. In the context of the hallowed space of the gallery, the viewer's relationship to these figures is always one of deference, where a certain relationship is foregrounded that can potentially leave the viewer isolated from the collection that aims to represent them. To try to complicate this dynamic, I have used Touchstone's extensive collections of mirrors to make the viewer aware of themselves in the space. These will be interspersed amongst the existing objects in the collection, allowing the viewer to be both present and active in the space, allowing a conversation to develop that posits them as central to the dialogue around community and the civic space. And on that note, I call time at the bar.